Welcome to the Vet to Vet podcast. I'm your host, Bill Fitters. Join me as I talk to fellow veterans about their military experiences from Vietnam to Operation Enduring Freedom. This podcast is sponsored by Tugs, talking, understanding, growing, and supporting. Even big ships need a little help sometimes. Feel free to hit the subscribe button below to get our latest Vet to Vet interview. Feel free to like, share, and leave a comment below. And thanks for joining us. Today I'm sitting down with Kurt Stuvengen, actually Chief Petty Officer Kurt Stuvengen, to tell us about his military experience. But before that, let's start with, where you grew up and everything prior to, not everything, but everything prior to your military experience.
All right. Started out in the womb.
That's always a good place.
Actually, I was born in San Francisco. My folks met. They ended up there after the war, and they met out there. And in 1965, my grandfather, who also lived out there, was retiring from the Navy Yard and moving back home here to Orfordville. And the folks decided that the big city wasn't a place to raise two little kids. My older brother's was in kindergarten, and basically the day he finished kindergarten, we were like the Beverly Hillbillies, loaded everything up and drove back here to Wisconsin. And so I was born in San Francisco but raised back here in Orfordville, Wisconsin.
Now, both your parents were veterans?
Yes, I'll get to that.
Okay.
So I grew up here. We got the old family compound that's been in the family since the late 1800s. My grandfather was in his name, and he gave a section of it to my dad and built the house that I'm living in now. So this is where I went to elementary and high school. Both my folks were in the Navy. In fact, I was thinking about it before this, including uncles and cousins, and my immediate family were at 200 plus years of service, and
Wow.
we've got all the branches with the Coast Guard represented. So we got from World War I on, we've had people in all the different conflicts, and so I growing up, I was a B student. I mean, I didn't figure I was college material, and I decided junior high, starting high school, that I was going to go in the Navy. Actually, I started out, I was thinking Marines or Coast Guard at first, and then my brother joined the Navy when I was a sophomore, and that kind of like, yeah, okay, So the Navy looked a little bit better because both mom and dad were in the Navy. So then I signed up delayed entry at the end of my junior year. So my whole senior year, I was already down on papers being in the Navy. And at the time, when I graduated in 1979, and at the time, 4 years in the service basically was equal to a college degree as far as employers, with experience, et cetera. So I didn't, and like I say, I wasn't an idiot, but I wasn't, calculus and things like that. I can't even spell it, never mind do it. So
I'm in that same boat.
So I also wanted to see the world. I wanted to learn a trade and see the world. So when I joined up, I got my rating was boiler technician. We steamed the shipboard boilers for main propulsion. There was a couple different types of propulsion on Navy ships. You had nuclear, which was relatively new. It had only been around for, I don't even think, 20 years. And then you had some diesel propulsion, and then steam was the big one. And that's what I did. So I went to boot camp down in Orlando, Florida. I was able to pick which boot camp because I'd signed up so early. I knew I was going to Great Lakes for training. I'd never been to Florida, so I went down there and did my 8 weeks of basic, and nothing there was nothing out of the ordinary there. I mean, I was the middle of the pack. I wasn't singled out. I wasn't a, recruit of the year or anything like that either. I just keep your head down, keep your mouth shut,
Yeah.
and let the mouthy guy be the one that gets in Dutch.
Yeah.
So the folks came down for my graduation. They wore their uniforms and stuff, so we got some pictures of that. And then I took a little bit of leave and then reported into Great Lakes for my training, my boiler training, and that ended up being almost a year.
Wow.
I had my A school, and then I also had advanced training. That was one of the programs I signed up for when I enlisted. It was a 6-year program. So you got the extra schooling. You also got E4 at the end of schooling.
Oh, okay.
So it was, I knew going in, it's all about the money.
It is.
I figured if I can get some rank right off the bat. So I finished up down there in June of 1980. And while I was down there, I didn't come home every weekend because sometimes I had duty, but for the most part, I came home on weekends. And, occasionally the buddies down there at school, we'd go to Chicago or Milwaukee or something, but it was mainly just going to school. And in the wintertime, freeze your buns off and, because you're marching to school and all that stuff. And at the time, the Navy didn't really give you any cold weather gear. I mean, they when you got to your eventual commands, then they had the cold weather, like if you was up in Alaska or something like that. But your stuff out of basic training, it was cold. And the one little story, I guess, I was in A school and I was standing out in the passageway in line. I'd reached the end of one of my modules, and we would cycle through and talk to the instructor and before we moved on to the next module. Well, like I say, it was cold. Well, my ma was always knitted, and when I was in school, she'd made me this really nice 6-foot-long knit scarf, and it was brown. So I took that back down to Great Lakes with me when I come home. So I'm standing there with, half a dozen guys waiting for our turn to go talk, and I got this scarf on and everything. Well, this chief walks by with his coffee because it was start of the workday, and he didn't say anything, just walked in, and next thing I know, this petty officer comes out and he's like, "Yeah, you come with me," and I'm like, "Oh wow, I get to go first," and I come in and the chief's sitting at his desk, and I'm standing there, I'm kind of like, well, what's going on? And he says, "Yeah, where'd you get that scarf?" And it's like, I'm like, oh, wow, he's showing interest in me, so I says, well, my mom knitted it for me thinking he might want one. And he says, well, did your mother fucking dress you too? Just started ripping me a new one about, it's supposed to be blue or black and get that shit off. And it's like, so that was the last time
Thanks, Mom.
Yeah, well, so that's the last time I wore the scarf down at Great Lakes. But, so I finished my training up and then came home on leave for 30 days. Well, my ship was stationed, home ported out of Pearl Harbor. So I flew over to Pearl, and another little funny thing, my recruiter had lived in Beloit, and he had this area here, and he ended up becoming him and his wife become good friends with my mom and dad. They joined Post 209 here and all that. Well, he was a submariner. And
okay.
So he was in Pearl Harbor, and I didn't really know that. Well, so I get off the plane, and it's like 11:30 at night, and I'm, all right, how the heck am I getting to the ship or the base or whatever? All of a sudden he steps out from behind a stanchion, and hey, it's like, oh wow. So that was cool. He took me home, and I stayed overnight there, and then the next morning, then his wife brought me into the ship to report aboard. And another little story with that one was they live up in Menominee now. Actually, I've still kept in touch with them, and Fumio and I have been up to visit them and all that. But so anyway, so we're in Pearl Harbor, and I'd gotten word at Great Lakes the ship was changing home ports to Yokosuka, Japan. but I didn't know when. I'd heard this was July, and I'd heard everything from August to January on when they were changing home ports. I didn't know. So we're, got quarters, and I mean, I came on board first thing in the morning, so we got quarters right away and everything, and they're talking about we're getting underway. This was a Monday morning. We're getting underway the next Monday, and I asked one of the guys that I hear we're changing home ports. When's that going to be? And it's like we leave Monday. So basically, I had a week in Pearl Harbor, and I saw a few of the sites, but I was the brand new guy, so it wasn't like I had a bunch of shipmates to run around with, and then also I had got back in touch with a buddy from A school in boot camp. We'd gone through all the training together. He was on a ship just down the pier, so we went out a couple times, and so anyway, so fast forward a week, and we get underway for Japan. Well, I didn't really mesh with my peers because this was 1980, and the first question everybody asks you is, "Are you cool?" Which for the younger folks out there, I don't know what they call it now, but back in the 70s and 80s, "Are you cool?" was, "Did you smoke dope?"
Yeah.
Well, I grew up in Orfordville. I mean, it was here.
Yeah.
Every once in a while somebody might, have a doobie or something at a school dance or whatever, but it wasn't prevalent, and I didn't do it. And so I just tell them, it's like, no, but I don't care if you do. I mean, I wasn't going to make waves, but right away then you're a narc or whatever. So I ended up starting to hang out with the senior petty officers. I was a third class in E4, and that also was a little bit of a burr under the saddle with some guys because I was advanced early. I didn't, like the guys would say in the fleet, you didn't earn it in the fleet, you got it out of school. Well, that was all on the individual. I mean, if you went out there with your eyes open and your mouth shut and learned the things you didn't know, you could do your job. But you get some of these guys that, they'd get that crow on their sleeve and then they turn into a dick, and it's like, well, no, you ain't earned your stripes,
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, so we're over in Yokosuka now, and we'd been there. We got over there. We switched crews with the cruiser that was over there. I was on a USS Reeves. It was a guided missile cruiser, Leahy class cruiser, and the USS Warden was home ported in Yokosuka. Well, they were doing a crew swap, so they took about, I guess it was somewhere around 2/3 of the crew, and swapped platforms, and then the Warden went back to Pearl Harbor. They had a really good shipyard over there in Japan, but they'd cycle the ships back to the States to get the more modern, like, weapons upgrades. I don't know if I think it had more to do with like classified top secret stuff, some of the electronic things and all that. They didn't want the Japanese working on. I'm assuming that's what it was. I don't know. But so anyway, so we've had this crew swap, and I'm sitting over at the club at lunch with my first class, and having a beer. Well, then one of his buddies, the bosun mate, first class, he's the guy out on deck, and he says, "I've been meaning to ask you something," and I'm like, well, I'm just kind of keeping my mouth shut and all this. And he says, "When you checked aboard in Pearl Harbor," he says, "you come rolling up to the bottom of the brow in this Continental, and you get out, and this hot-looking lady gets out." And I was like, "Who was that?" And I says, "Well, that was my recruiter's wife." I'm all, innocent. I don't know what's going on. Well, of course, both of them are like, "Oh," it's like, so then they're thinking there's more to it than there was, and then I had to explain, because they're like, "Okay, give me more,"
Right.
And
Yeah.
so then it was, I guess, it must have been a bit of a letdown to find out, well, they're friends with my folks and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, so anyway, so I ended up in 1980, I ended up in Yokosuka, and I ended up not leaving Japan until 12 years later.
Oh, wow.
I did 6 years on the cruiser, went from, brand new on board, not knowing anything, to when I left, I was the leading petty officer of the fire room, E6, and running the show and all that, and went to shore duty there on base. Being in engineering, there wasn't a whole lot of shore duty that was actually in our rate. I know listening to Jeff's thing there, Air Force guys, your jobs, you kind of move around. You're always working in your job for the most part. Well, with engineering, we would go to what they call general duty billets, and could be military police or in my case, I went over to staff the barracks. I was the LPO, or the leading petty officer of the barracks complex, and each barracks had a petty officer in charge, second or third class, and pretty much all of us were engineering. It was a supply department.
Okay.
So we were working for supply types, which that got interesting a couple times. But so I did 2 years there, and the main reason I went to shore duty was I'd met my wife while I was still on the ship through a mutual friend of mine. A good buddy of mine had been on the carrier, the Midway, and him and his wife knew my wife's family, and we met that way. So so she grew up in Yokohama, and but being on the ship, we were gone all the time.
Yeah.
So when I went to shore duty, I had time to, because there's like 6 months of paperwork you have to do to marry a foreign national with background checks and all this business, and got all that done, and we got married up at the embassy. Raised my right hand through bulletproof glass and said yes, everything's true, and boom, we were married. So, but the 6 years at sea was arduous. I mean, the stateside folks, their ship might make one Westpac, Western Pacific cruise, might make one in 2 or 3 years. They do smaller jaunts up and down the coast, or maybe over to Hawaii and back, or do some exercises and stuff, but they're in and out, and a lot of them from back then anyway, you got underway on Monday, we're back in on Friday, whereas over in they had ships stationed out of Japan. There was a full battle group over there. There were the cruiser, a couple destroyers, 4 frigates, the carrier, and then we had the Admiral's flagship. And then down in Sasebo, which is in southern Japan, they had an amphibious group stationed out of there. And the whole thought process of that was it would take a couple weeks to get a battle group from the States all the way into Westpac.
Okay.
So by stationing these ships there, we were right there. And keep in mind, this was back when the Cold War and the Russians and China wasn't such a big thing, but North Korea was, those whack jobs were rattling their sabers. So by having us right there, we'd get underway for a month at a time, in and out. We'd come back we could only stay in port for 30 days. The carrier could only be in for 30 days, and then they had, leave for a couple days and then come back. But it was all part of the status of forces agreement with the government of Japan. So we were underway a lot more, and that was always a surprise for the statessiders that would come over that had already been on a ship in the States. Was the op tempo was so much more fast paced, and when we went out and played war games, we actually played with the Russians. It wasn't, blue ship, green ship, and all that. I mean, it was, we'd be out there doing our thing with our battle group, and all of a sudden these supposed fishing trawlers would come along. Well, okay, fishing trawlers usually didn't have a couple dozen antennas sticking off them.
Right.
So,
kind of a giveaway.
Yeah, and then they'd try to work their way in by the carriers. So then one of the frigates or destroyers would pinch them off and things like that. And then of course the air wing off the Midway, they'd play with them all the time, the other jets and stuff, and there were quite a few stories of the engagements over there with that. And I mean, obviously we didn't go to World War III, but at this time frame, I mean, everybody was sweating nuclear World War III, and we had a couple times where it got dicey. We were up off of Korea, and I just hit my rack, and it was, I don't know, 11:30 at night, I guess, and we went to GQ battle stations, and a couple of North Korean gunboats were making a run on us. And so, I mean, it all, nothing came of it, but it gets your adrenaline pumping and,
Oh yeah.
that. And so we made, on that 6 years, I made 2 trips out to the Persian Gulf. I went to the ship right after the Iranian hostage crisis. They had just gotten back from that evolution, and we went out there again in '81. That was my first real long cruise, and it was still, tensions were still high from the whole hostage thing, and basically it was a show of the flag. We'd go up into the Gulf with the carrier, and just float around and show the flag.
Let them know we're still
exactly,
around.
exactly. And then we went again in '85. We made another trip out there. It was our turn basically. In the middle of that, my ship had gone through an extended yard period in dry dock, so it was, I had some time off there, and I'd gotten into a car club over there. One of my mentors that came on board that really showed me the ropes of being a Westpac sailor. I had a little dots. I think over here they were called dots and B10s or B210, something like that. And but we'd race, and that was what I was spending my money on. Instead of beer and hookers, it was my car. And
Yeah.
then I got my girlfriend, and now my wife. And so I was racing cars over there and having a good time. And then right towards the end is when I got into motorcycles, because the yen rate had been strong when I got there, and it basically got cut in half in around '83 or '84, if I remember right. So your dollar didn't go as far. And I couldn't bring the car back to the States because it was a right-hand drive car.
Oh yeah.
So it was a thing there of okay, do I put my money into something that I can't do anything with? So I sold off all the parts and everything, and then got a little Suzuki to learn the ropes on, and then I ended up getting my first Harley over there. So then I went to shore duty, did the general billet thing, got married, and then I was up for orders again to go back to sea. Well, in the meantime, if you remember, I did steam, and all the ships now in Yokosuka, they were switching them out for gas turbine. Gas turbine propulsion had come out right about the time I came in the Navy, but they were still building the ship, so it was still, most of the ships were steam, and they were also gearing up for this President Reagan's 600 ship Navy.
Oh, okay, yeah, I remember that.
So you had a lot of these ships out there and everything. Well, anyway, they wanted the newer weapon systems, the newer ships. They were moving them out to the Far East. Well, there's no job for me on one of those, so the billets had kind of went away. I mean, there were still a couple on the carrier, but I didn't really want to go to the carrier unless that was the last resort. Well, Sasebo, Japan, is in the southern island, and that's where that amphibious group was at. Well, they had some billets down there. It was still steam, so we ended up going down there, and I did 4 years on the ship down there. Well, that was when Desert Storm happened. I got on board in '88, and then we did the. Actually, my ship, it was infamous in the deal where literally just 2 to 3 weeks before they flew me out there on board to get on board, they, I guess, ran over some boat people.
Oh.
There was a refugee boat that they stopped, and the captain was a bit of a whack job. I mean, he was a Vietnam War hero. I mean, Silver Star, Bronze Star, Purple Heart. I mean, highly decorated, but apparently that had caused him to become unwrapped a little bit. And he was, from the stories the guys told me, I guess he was hell on wheels on the crew. And anyway, this was an amphib. Our job was to carry Marines in their landing craft and their helos and all that. We weren't I mean, we were a warship. We weren't like a missile ship or a gunboat or anything like that. Which, if he had been a CO of one of those boats, he would have taken us into World War III, because he was driving this thing like it was, we had all these weapons on board. We had a couple of 3-inch 50 gun mounts, and that was about it. The Marines were that was our
Your weapon.
weapon, basically, yeah. Well, they came across this refugee boat while he was on the way out. This wasn't Desert Storm. This was the tanker escort time frame. And he wanted to get to the fight. So I guess they pulled alongside and sent a guy over, and I mean, the boat was leaking and all that, but because anytime that we'd picked up refugees on the reefs too, and anytime they see a Navy ship coming, they know they can get rescued, so they'll sabotage their own boat.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you can't blame them.
No,
right?
No,
So, I mean, if the boat's seaworthy, they give them charts and food and send them on their way. Well, if the boat's sinking, it's a humanitarian thing. So, anyway, apparently what he did was he made the decision that the mission was too vital and gave some food and charts, and we're on our way. Well, I guess a couple of them had tried to climb up the mooring lines or the anchor chain or whatever it was, and got knocked off with fire hoses. And, this was a deal where the crew didn't want to do this, but they're being ordered to, and long story short, he ended up getting relieved and court-martialed. A bunch of the guys had to fly to the Philippines for the court-martial because they were witnesses and all this business. So, but anyway, so I picked the ship up out in the Gulf. This was a tanker escort thing, and what our mission was we would anchor out in the minefield, and then we were the mothership for the minesweepers. Minesweepers are all very small ships. I'd say they probably got 50, if that, for crew, a couple officers, and the rest enlisted. So they can self-sustain, but it's a lot nicer if they can come alongside a bigger ship. We do their laundry, and they could eat on our mess decks and things like that.
It's kind of like going outside the wire and then getting a chance to come back.
Yeah, go to the rear area
Just
or whatever. Right.
You can actually put your guard down.
Sure. So that was kind of our mission for that, and the Marines we had on board, they had all their Conex boxes packed our well deck, and each one was like its own self-contained little shop, and there was a lot of electronic stuff, and so what they were monitoring, I don't know, but they were doing their thing. And so then that ended up, we got back just before Christmas, and then we went into an availability, 3-month availability there in the spring, and so I was getting my feet wet down there. I came on board, and the fellow that introduced me and my wife, he was my chief. That was one of the reasons I got orders there. We were running buddies, Liberty buddies and stuff. He'd been on the Midway, and I was on the Reeves, and well, the guy they had on there, I mean, he wasn't a bad person, the first class that had the pit, but he was one of those, I want to be your buddy, I don't want to be your boss. And there was still an issue with some of the stateside-ers because the ship had only been over there for a couple of years. So there was still some of that stateside attitude. This place sucks, I don't want to be here, yada, yada, yada. Yeah. And so you're dealing with that. So I got on board. 28 days after I got on board, I was put in charge. And it just, the only place to go was up. I mean, I had a bunch of good guys working for me. They hadn't been taught anything. They'd had a couple of fellas, I guess, were crackerjack mechanics, second class E5, and they did all the work. Well, when the younger guys, the junior guys that want to learn, well, go paint that or go clean. We're working on this. Well, then they transferred. Mm-hmm. So now these fellas are, they don't know what to do. Nobody taught them anything, So I started, showing them the ropes, and we had a maintenance program that had step-by-step PMS cards, we called them, planned maintenance cards. So it was just a matter of giving them a chance to learn the ropes. If they got questions, and And then we started getting a few more guys checking on board that had been in Westpac and knew how things worked. And so eventually we ended up getting a damn good team down in the fire room. So I got sailor of the quarter for that first quarter I was on board because I turned the space around and all that. And one of the best things that in my whole career was when I had a third class. I got on board in October, and this fellow was, in fact, we're Facebook friends now. But he was getting out and going to school, and he was, he was a good kid. He'd really turned around and was one of my better mechanics and all that. And in December, he was short. He was getting out within like a month, I think. And he said, yeah, BT1, if you'd come on board 6 months ago, I would have re-enlisted. And I told him, I says, man, I said, what do I need to do to get you to stay? I mean, let me know. We can make this happen. And he told me, he says, he was actually bummed out. But he'd already paid money for college and was all signed up and all that. So he, can't blame him.
No.
But that made me feel good that obviously I was doing my job right.
And making that impact on the
Sure,
troops. Yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
So we come out of the availability. Well, then our job was the Marines were all stationed out of Okinawa. So we'd leave Sasebo, which is on the southern tip of Japan, and Okinawa was always first place out, last place coming back. And we'd go do exercises. We kind of made the big triangle there. We'd hit Okinawa, and then we'd either head up to Korea for exercises up there, or we'd go down to the Philippines, and then intermixed in there was, Liberty ports. We did Singapore, Hong Kong, and I did the same thing on the reefs too. We hit quite a few of the ports over in Westpac, the different countries, and hit Australia a couple times, so
in those travels, did you get like the shellback ceremony?
Yep. We did that. I crossed the line the first time in 1981. That was on our way to Australia. So that was the shellback, is where you go from being a pollywog to a shellback, and that's all about crossing the equator. Well, then you're a golden dragon when you cross the date line. Well, I did that when we left Pearl Harbor. Became that, but there's no big ceremony for that. I guess maybe way back in, before the war, maybe there was, because the ships didn't go to the Far East that much. So maybe there was a little bit more to it then. But no, crossing the line, that was, and, I still got my shillelagh from my hunk of fire hose because after you've crossed, then you're the guy that puts the beating down on them, on the next one,
Nice.
Well, and it's evolved, or I should say devolved, over the years. My nephew's in the Navy, and he crossed the first time, back in the early 2000s, and said it was more of a just, PT. A lot of PT, because of the way it's changed. Well, I got a video of a home movie that my dad took in the 50s when he went across the first time in 1945. So when he went across on the Franklin Roosevelt, was the aircraft carrier, and they had gone around the Horn of South America, so he became a horny shellback. But he has a video of where the guys are going through the thing, and a couple things. I mean, he was on the beating end, and one of his jobs was there's, the cleansing pool, which is nothing but a big box with a tarp full of seawater and trash and everything else, and you sit the guy in the chair, and then you kick him over backwards into the pool. Well, they also had set up to where there was a slight electrical current going through the pool to get their attention. Well, of course, obviously they couldn't do that, in my day, and they damn sure couldn't do it now,
That would violate some electrical code somewhere.
But one thing that was really neat, now this video was from 1956, I think it was, and there were a lot of blacks in the crew. At the time, I believe by then they had opened up the rates to because normally blacks and Filipinos could only be stewards, cooks, officers, cooks and stuff. And I'm not sure if that had it opened up to other rates yet at 56, but the thing that I thought was really cool was the blacks that were already shellbacks were right alongside the whites that were already shellbacks wailing on the pollywogs, whether they were white or black. And from stories I've heard and other things, especially out in civilian society, that division of the civil rights and the black and white and all that and the military has always been way head and shoulders ahead of everybody else when it came to equality in the races and the sexes and all that. I'm not saying they were perfect by any stretch,
Right.
and there are issues, but if you compare the military to the civilian world, they've always been way ahead of the game.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was so cool in that video from the mid '50s that obviously out on the pond, homie don't play that,
Right. And it's that brotherhood. It doesn't
Right,
matter,
right,
It doesn't
right.
matter what culture you walk from, what
You're
race
all-
you walk from, what sex you walk from. It's just that brotherhood. And
Well, and that's something that the Navy has that the other services really don't, is when you're out on the pond and something happens, you're it. I mean, whether it's whether you're actually closing with the enemy and fighting and you're taking incoming fire, or you have some sort of emergency on board, a fire aboard, which is one of the worst things that can happen at sea. You can't call the fire department. You can't call back to base for reinforcements or whatever. So I mean, you end up, and we train that way. We band together and you take care of each other and it's not, well, that's not my job, or if something happens down in engineering, I mean, if it gets out of control, and I mean the whole ship is involved. So you got the guys from deck and operations and all that they're down there right alongside you, fighting the fire or whatever the case may be. Because if it goes, we all go.
right. Because there is no walking home.
Right, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, when we do our abandoned ship drills, they would, one of the things they tell you is, the closest point of land, they give you the direction in nautical miles. Well, okay, when you're looking and you don't see anything from horizon to horizon, it's like, okay, so, the closest land is 40 nautical miles due west. It's like, well, that don't do me a lot of good.
There's a lot of sharks in
Yeah.
between there.
Yeah.
Think
yeah.
about that.
So anyway, so I did my 4 years on Dubuque with the Marines, and I made Chief Petty Officer on there. And my last year on board, I was the chief, and
Which is quite an achievement for those that don't understand that. Chief is a
E7.
E7, yeah. Air Force, you're really not anything. I shouldn't put it that way, but when you get E8, E9, you start.
Well, and that's something that and even the other branches realize that there's a pretty good division in responsibility isn't the word, but it's a pretty good division between E6 and then 7, 8, and 9, and so it's there's a whole ceremony involved and change of uniforms. The uniforms we wear are more similar to the officers' uniforms, and so your middle management, senior NCO, whatever, however you want to describe it, but. So yeah, it was a pretty big step. And I finished up on there, and then I'd been overseas for 12 years, and so then I did an overseas tour at Great Lakes. So I came back to the States, brought Fumio back, and my son Levi, he was 18 months, I guess. He was a Desert Shield baby. My ship had gone out for Desert Shield. We took the Marines out and all that. But then before Desert Storm went up, we'd gone back because the whole battle group had left Japan, both the carrier battle group and the amphibious battle group. Well, now Fat Boy up in Korea decided, well, hey, there's nobody here, so he started rattling his sabers, and they started these supposed exercises. They were starting to move south, and so they sent the amphibious group back. I mean, we really didn't have a mission once we offloaded the Marines anyway. So we went back to kind of keep an eye on North Korea. Um, so I got to Great Lakes, and I was an instructor in the boiler field up there. We had the boiler technicians, and then the machinist mates were the guys that ran the main engines, the big steam turbines. So we worked hand in hand together. You had to know each other's job. Some of the ships, like my first ship, the cruiser, we had fire rooms and engine rooms separated by bulkheads, and a lot of the ships were that way. Well, then the amphibious ship that I was on, we were all in one big space. So it depended on which ship you went to, how it was laid out, but you really needed to know each other's jobs. So basically, we went through the same training. The A school was pretty close to the same. I mean, there might be a couple little things in there because the machinist mates would also get more involved with ACNR and things like that. We called those guys A gang, auxiliaries gang, and if you weren't main propulsion down in the main spaces, you'd be out working on the hydraulics and ACNR, that type of stuff. So they had a little bit of that training. But so I did that for 3 years down at Great Lakes, and I also had an ulterior motive coming back to Great Lakes. One, Mom was kind of going batshit because I'd been gone so long, and now we had a grandbaby, and so we came back to Great Lakes, and we tried to get home at least up for the weekend, at least once a month, and everything. But I wanted Fumio to live in the Midwest, see how she handled that.
Yeah.
Because if I waited till we got out, come home and then find out, she can't handle it, doesn't want to stay here or whatever, well, then now we got our hands full. So
Yeah.
Figured, well, let's find out now before it happens. And she still doesn't particularly care for the cold weather, but she was okay with living back here. So at my end of my tour at Great Lakes, I got orders back to Japan, and this was a real switch. And for some of the older guys, couldn't believe it. I basically got back-to-back shore duty, which for BTs and MMs was unheard of. Our rotation was, as a E6 or below, was 5x2. You did 5 at sea, 2 ashore, maybe 3 ashore. And then at CPO, it was maybe 3 and 3 if you were lucky, but a lot of times it was still pretty lopsided. But keeping in mind now, more of those gas turbine ships were out in the fleet, and they were decommissioned in the steamships, so there were fewer and fewer billets. Well, they had been gearing up for the 600 ship Navy, so they were bringing in more and more people. They were training more and more people. Well, now, the administrations had changed. Desert Storm was over. They were decomming ships, closing bases. So now they got all these people and nowhere to put them. So the fuel farm or fuel depot back in Japan, there was one up in Yokohama, and then there was one in Sasebo. And one of the guys that had been on my first ship was the detailer, and so I called him and talked to him, and he gave me the choice, Yokohama or Sasebo. Well, I figured my wife would want Yokohama, but I wanted to double check, so I went home and checked with her and got back to him in a couple days, and she had picked Sasebo. It just, we still had friends there, and she liked the place. It was more laid back. It wasn't as congested and everything. Well, which was good, because by the time I called him back, the Yokohama billet had gone away.
Wow.
Somebody had already filled it. So I went back for basically a 3.5-year tour, because that was my last tour. So I finished up there, and all the employees were Japanese. There was maybe half a dozen of us sailors that were actually on the fuel farm, and this was another supply department. But our commanding officer was up in Yokosuka at the big Fleet Industrial Supply Center, and then we were a detachment. We had an officer in charge, an 05 commander, and a lieutenant was our AOIC, but then the rest of us was all enlisted.
And I don't think a lot of people understand that. Like when I was in Spain, I can relate that when we're in somebody else's country, we hire or contract out
Sure.
a lot of that work to work alongside us.
Right. I mean, we called them MLCs. It was military labor contract, and
Yeah.
that's exactly what it was. The shipyard up in Yokosuka, the supply and all the logistics guys, and they were all Japanese, and it was, you got your labor force there, and then there's military oversight, and you get a handful of military in there to. But we would, we come and go. We're there for 2-3 years, maybe
Right.
a little longer, but those guys are there for 20, 30, 40 years. So
It's generations in
sure.
some cases.
So they ran the show. I mean,
Yeah.
we were just kind of there, and it was actually pretty nice. Now Sasebo, the shipyard, it was a civilian shipyard. It was SSK Heavy Industries. They built the big super tankers. But they would also work on the Navy ships, and we used their dry dock, and that was really, I guess, impressive and entertaining, watching those guys build those super tankers, because they'd do it all up on the piers. They'd weld up these huge, giant sections of these super tankers to include all the piping running down the bulkheads. I mean, we would drive through the shipyard to get out to the fuel farm. And you'd see they'd have, dozens of these pipes running along the skin of the inside of the ship with the flanges and everything already welded on. So as they're dropping these pieces down into the dry docks to weld them together,
Wow.
those flanges were already mated up and all that. It was just really neat watching them put these things together, and then they'd have their big ceremony when they'd launch them, and then they'd drive on out of the basin, and
Wow.
it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
It was pretty cool watching that. But so then I retired in '99 from Japan. My folks come over for the ceremony, and that was a little entertaining for a while, because I told them quite a few months ahead of time. Well, Dad didn't like to fly. And when we first started talking about it, I ain't going. I've already been there. Well, he'd been there during the war, and then he was there during Vietnam. And Mom was trying to be civil about it, and finally just said, well, fine, but I'm going anyway. So okay. Well, then I made him. He was part of my ceremony. He come over in uniform, and so it was really neat. It really meant a lot that they made it over there and were part of the ceremony and everything.
So how many total years?
Did 20? I did 20 years and 2 days.
Okay.
Final time. I came back to the States in April, but I had a bunch of leave built up and all that. So I finally, my civilian date was July 1st of '99, and I got in steaming boilers up at University of Wisconsin in Madison, July 12th of '99. So I'd basically went from shipboard to actually, at the time they were burning coal up there. So it was actually kind of neat. I mean, it was hard work and dirty and hot and all that, but there's any Navy engineer knows the movie The Sand Pebbles with Steve McQueen, and that was kind of our thing, because those were the engineers, and they were steaming coal and all that. Well, reading the book and watching the movie, knowing what I knew about shipboard boilers, but we burned diesel fuel, and there were some things I couldn't quite figure out just watching the movie or even reading the book, But then once I got up there and it was actually doing it, then everyone's like, you get that little Ford light thing where it all came together and all that. So that was interesting, and I did that for 10 years, and then they switched over to natural gas boilers, and so I finished out. We were steaming regular, basically what I was used to. I mean, it wasn't diesel, but gas and diesel are pretty close as far as how everything works. You don't have the coal handling equipment and all that, but. And then I just retired this last January. So I did 20 with the Navy and 20 with the state. So
Nice.
But the shipboard thing, it was fun. It was hard. Work hard, play hard. That type of thing. And I was able to see. I've been all the way around the world. 3/4 of the way by ship, the rest of the way by plane. When I went out to meet the Dubuque, that was the amphib I was on. When I got to Sasebo, the crew members, they fly them out to wherever the ship's at. Well, they had, just before I got there, they'd flown 10 guys out from Japan to the Persian Gulf, and they flew them west. And it was something like $25,000 because America doesn't have any air carriers, at least at the time, that flew west of Japan to London. That was it was like a dead zone.
Mm-hmm.
So there were 4 of us that were going to the Dubuque, and we left Sasebo, the base, and they drove us up to Fukuoka, where we took a domestic flight up to Osaka. And at Osaka, we got on board Northwest Orient, which for the younger folks, that's the now defunct American carrier. But so we flew from Osaka to San Francisco to Chicago to Boston to London. And that was all on Northwest Orient.
Ah.
And then in London, we took a Cathay Pacific from London to Bahrain. The ticket from London to Bahrain was more expensive than the Northwest Orient ticket from Osaka to London by way of the United States.
Wow.
And the other thing about that was that at every hub we stopped at, we basically had time to grab our gear, cross the jetway, and get on the next plane. The only place we did have like a 4-hour layover in London, but we spent that whole time trying to find one guy's luggage. Because obviously changing airlines, we had to, we had to get all our gear. So, I'd been hoping I could at least, change $20 or $50 and run outside the airport and, buy a sandwich or something just to say, I've been to London, well, never made it out of Heathrow. So, so it was 44 hours in the air. That was a little, that was interesting. And then I guess the other thing about all that, we worked hard, we played hard, but there were a few times where, my job was, it was dangerous. The first ship, it was 1,200 pounds of steam. The plant was run off 1,200 pounds of steam, and then the amphib was 600 pounds. Well, that stuff will cut a man in half.
Yeah.
It's 800-900 degrees. You're working with turbines. You're working with reciprocating pumps, and so if you're not careful, I saw a guy. He went in to wipe some oil off a gauge and screwed up. Had the rag wrapped around his hand. It caught the coupling. Slammed his hand up into the coupling of the pump that was running and just sheared his knuckle off clean as could be.
Wow.
Other guys, I was fortunate to never be in like a main space fire, conflagration type or anything, but, we had our share of drill or actual casualties, and I was in a few that still bother me. But you deal with it. It's your job, you know what you're doing, and that's the thing. You're below the water line. We're down in the bowels of the ship, they call it, and it's pretty much a given, and the guys like from the war or whatever can tell you. You're locked in. You're at battle stations. You're, not padlocked in, but all the hatches are secure, and you're down 4, 5, 6 decks. Some carriers are down, I guess even more than that, 10 levels or whatever. Well, you take a hit, you ain't getting out of there.
Right.
Not to mention if it's like a torpedo or something. Well, if it breaks a steam line, you're dead anyway.
Right.
When I was on Dubuque, there was because it was just the anniversary of it here just a couple of weeks ago, there was a ship that was in the Gulf, and they'd had some repairs done by one of the civilian shipyards there in Bahrain. And they put the valve back in the system. Well, instead of using steel fasteners. At the time, they called them black oxide. And what it was a bronze fastener that had a black oxide coating, but you put them side to side with a steel fastener, you couldn't really tell the difference unless you knew how to read the markings.
Mm-hmm.
All your metal fasteners have markings of some kind on them, and if you weren't paying attention, well, apparently the shipyard hadn't brought the proper fasteners with them, and every space had a junk drawer. Well, they went over and got fasteners out of there. Well, this was, I want to say it was a 150-pound system. I'm not positive, but they were getting ready to get underway and were pressurizing the system, testing it out, and they had, they had a couple officers and all the supervisors. I mean, they're all here checking this valve out in the overhead when those fasteners let go. It basically stripped them clean, and there was 9 of them killed.
Wow.
And then there was a fire on one of the supply ships. They were bringing on fuel, and there was a valve that had been under repair and was disassembled. And there were some shortcuts taken, mistakes made, and all that. Well, what happened was when they started bringing on fuel, it was just like a geyser. They'd taken the valve apart. So this stream of fuel, solid stream of fuel, comes out and hits the hot boiler and just exploded.
Yeah.
And there was over a dozen guys killed there. But those were all my peers, my fellow engineers. So I mean, it was you knew it. I mean, in the back of your mind, you knew it. And that was one thing working up at Madison. And by no stretch do I mean everybody, but there were a few guys up there, the civilians, that they came in, they knew which end of a wrench to use. We trained them and all that, but they never really got the whole thing of how dangerous this stuff is. You can't be scared of it, because then you can't do your job, but you got to respect it. And these guys would, they didn't give it the respect it was due. And it's like, I don't care if you kill yourself.
Right.
Or you hurt yourself, but you're endangering me too. And that's where, so I had my 20 in up there, but I decided it was time to go. I mean, when I first went up there, and the guys that were there, most of them had been in the Navy, because we had that pool of bodies, guys that do their hitch, get out, and, hey, you know how to steam a boiler, great. Well, like I say, with the gas turbines and the diesels and nuke and all that, we didn't have that pool of bodies anymore. So the last 10 years I was there, we were scrambling to hire people, because the guys that had the experience were getting the big bucks with Alliant or MG&E those guys, because they could pay more. I mean, this UW was a state job, so we were a different pay scale. So we were getting mechanical aptitude, guys that had been in AC&R or mechanic or something like that. Like I say, that knew, had mechanical aptitude, and then we were training them. And then, for the most part, they come on board with it and all that. But like I say, there were a few that, in the Navy, it's pounded into your head from the beginning. I mean,
safety first.
Safety first, and all the lockout, tagout programs and hearing conservation and all this kind of stuff. So, so that was kind of it, and it was a lot of fun. I at the end of my 20 years, there were a couple reasons that I retired. I mean, I could have, as an E7, I could have gone to 24 years before retiring. But at 20 years, I mean, I'd had the back-to-back shore duty, so that really squashed any chance of advancement. But my son was in second grade. I would have definitely been going back to sea. And, I wanted to see him grow up, spend more time with him. The Navy was changing. Political correctness was really starting to come into play, and I didn't like that. And I figured it was time. It wasn't the Navy that I joined. It wasn't the Navy I mean, I was trained by Vietnam vets. Those were the guys that showed me the ropes and all that. And then I was raised by two World War II vets, so it was a whole different dynamic, and I guess I wasn't willing to change with it. And I'd gone to school my last tour there, that shore duty, that gave me the opportunity to go to college. Because, like I said at the beginning, when I came in, it was 4 years in the service, 4 years in school was the same. Well, when I got to Great Lakes, a bunch of the guys were going to school, and talking with them, realized that it had changed, where you really needed that degree on the outside. And I saw a lot of them folks, they'd go to school, get their degree, well, they'd retire on Friday and go to work for someplace there around the Great Lakes area on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have I don't want to say I didn't have the opportunity to go to school at Great Lakes. It wasn't in the cards. I ended up working a second job and all that, so I didn't have the time, basically. But when I got back to Japan, that was part of the check-in process, was swinging by Navy campus, and the gal that ran that, she was a Navy vet, and about 4'8" of just piss and vinegar, and you will, and all this. And I mean, she rode her. I got my degree in 3 years, and it was, a lot of it was because of her. I mean, she was right there on top of you, and no excuse. So just a super gal. I'm still in touch with her.
A good peer to have.
Exactly. And I mean, there's a lot of us that are thankful to her for what she did for us. Was because, I mean, she kept your nose to the grindstone, basically, and excuses didn't work with her, But
them are good people.
Yeah. So I was able to get my degree. As it turned out, it didn't really matter for my job, but I didn't know that, so it was good to get that done. So I basically, you'd commented about, one of the whole reasons behind these little talks. Well, for the folks out there listening, especially the younger folks, I mean, the military is a good route to take. I can't really attest to the new military, if it's worth staying for a career, but it's nothing but beneficial to at least do a hitch.
Yeah.
If nothing else, it pays for your college. They got a heck of a GI Bill, mm-hmm. which is something I didn't have. I came in after the Vietnam era GI Bill and before the Montgomery GI Bill, and now there's I think it's post 9/11 GI Bill, or something like that.
And that's supposed to be pretty good.
So that was another reason that I had to scramble to get my degree done before I got out, because I was able to get tuition assistance through the Navy, but I still had to pay some money for it. But yeah, you do a hitch. I mean, you can see whatever branch you go in, but the Navy's the best one for travel.
They do travel a lot.
So you can see the world, experience cultures. I mean, that's something that just gets me with some of these younger folks that whether it's they're protesting or doing whatever, they've never left mom and dad's basement.
Yeah.
I mean, if you get out in the world and see some things where you can come back and instead of, well, I saw it on Facebook,
Right.
Well, then we can have a conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been to third world countries. I've seen poverty. I've seen slums.
Mm-hmm.
I've been on projects to the chaplains, to the orphanages with the chaplains where, these kids have nothing, and I mean, you give them a pair of socks or a pair of flip-flops, and it's like you just gave them the greatest Nintendo set that's out there, whatever. And I mean, these kids can't even fathom what a video game is,
Yeah, the priorities are different, and I totally get what you're saying. What we give here, are more, I don't want to say monetary, but in other countries, because we've seen it in Turkey, we've seen it in parts of Spain, we're giving them something they need for life.
Oh, sure.
Or something
Right.
they actually need. And I think that's the difference between U.S. setup, charities versus, what we did in the military, charities for other countries and stuff. Yeah, so I get what you're saying about seeing what the real slums are
Right,
like.
right. So, and whether it's pollution. I mean, I get the whole Greenpeace and the ozone and the Sierra Club and and all this, but the thing is I mean, I guess every little bit helps, said the mouse that pissed in the sea. But
Yeah.
the thing is we pulled into Korea and South Korea, which is very industrialized, and I mean, they still heat with charcoal over there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm standing out on the deck at dusk and looking across the city, and it's like that scene from Mary Poppins of the skyline of London, where there's nothing but black smoke coming everywhere from the houses and the factories, and China, the pollution over there, and so I mean, we're one small speck of the whole
Yep.
global ozone thing and all that. So I don't know if putting all this. Yeah, let's get off that. But yeah, but anyway, the other thing for the younger folks that are considering the military, my time in, like I say, I came up you're basically raised by, the Vietnam guys. That's who brought me through the ranks and everything, and it was kind of the same time frame you were in. I mean, if you're doing your job, and obviously, you're going to get hurt or aches and pains or whatever. Well, in my day, it was only pussies went to medical.
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't, unless you had a bloody stump, you didn't go up there for nothing. You wrapped a rag around it or just shrugged it off and went on with your work. Well, that's biting me in the ass now. And a lot of guys, you're trying to go to the VA because now we're broken, and there's no documentation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you go to the VA, the doctors and nurses are great.
Yeah.
At least my experience, they're great. But the ones that are in the comp and pen, the compensation and pension, I think, is what the ones that look at for your disability or whatever, to your face, but they're not your friend.
Right.
I mean, they're looking out for the government. And,
Mm-hmm.
What you say is what goes down. So I can't stress enough for you folks that are in the service right now or planning to go in, document everything. Go to medical. You wrench your shoulder, you fall down, smack your knee, whatever. Get that documented.
Yeah.
And anything that happens, when they ask you questions, you got questionnaires at dental, have you ever had this and this and this? It has nothing to do with your teeth. But have you ever had this and this and this? And if you have, put it down. I mean,
Absolutely.
you're not doing yourself any favors, because you may be fine when you're 25, but I tell you what, when you're 55 and you're broken,
Mm-hmm.
they're not out for you. So I mean, if you really need to, I can't stress it enough. So.
You can be part of the team, but still look out for yourself.
Right,
And,
right.
And don't let anybody tell you that you're not part of the team because you need to go get looked at or get checked out. Like you say, and get that documented.
I mean, you also want to, you still got to do your job.
Right.
I mean, it's one of them where, I mean, you have guys that, I got a blister, I got to run right up to medical, or I got to do this, or I got to do that. Well, no, because we're right in the middle of an evolution. You don't.
Right.
But after the fact, that my point being is don't end up being a malingerer or a slacker, because that's just going to come back and bite you in the ass with your coworkers. And but make sure you get stuff documented, because you're going to need it in the future. So, and then don't be afraid to reach out too. I mean,
Right.
The stuff that we deal with, especially the guys that are in right now. I mean, I watched that movie 1918 from World War I.
Yeah.
And the Civil War or whatever. I mean, there's always been whatever they called it, battle fatigue and all that. I mean, there was always a name for it, all the way up to what they got known as PTSD. And you're not alone.
No, not at all.
I mean, the things that you've gone through, or the reactions you're having to to things that have happened to you. While the circumstances might not be exactly the same, the cause and effect is the same, whether it's the nightmares or the cold sweats or the anxiety or whatever, and reach out to your fellow veterans.
Yeah, absolutely.
If we haven't exactly experienced that, we can at least point you in the right direction as somebody that can help you out. And I know from experience that that the people I've talked to are very very helpful. I mean, they're very caring, and like I say, that's in the 40 years now that I've been doing this, the 20 in the Navy, and then now I've been out 20 years, that the pendulum has swung. I think they realized they were doing a disservice to all those veterans that had issues. You know, the old General Patton thing of slapping the guy and sending him back to the front lines and all that. And so.
Well, even like, you know, you go from Patton to, let's say, like Band of Brothers.
Right.
Where
right.
he's like, I think it was an Army guy, so I'm not real good on their terminology, but the guy's name was Bly. Where his commander turned to him and said, just take your time, come back when you're ready.
Right.
And I think he did. He turned around and came back out. Where Patton would have slapped the guy, like you said, and said, you know, get out of here. This is for the heroes or whatever.
Right.
Kind of downgrade the guy until he walked out of the tent. But yeah. But and then you're also a part of the Legion, which there's people there too.
Right, and I mean, I'm a member of the VFW, the Legion, Sons of the American Legion, Fleet Reserve Association. I mean, there's a myriad of veterans groups out there, some more specific than others, whether it's to your, like Fleet Reserve Association is strictly Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, the sea services, and I know there's Army groups and things like that, but, you know, join as many as you want as you can afford to, but if you try to do everything and all of them, you're not going to get anything done. So it's something that, because Ma and Dad were very active in the Legion. Ma ended up being a national officer and all that. And that was one thing Mom said is join them all, but dedicate yourself to one. Because, I mean, they need, at the Washington level, they need numbers and money, so your dues and the fact that you're a member helps, but then you dedicate your time and energy to one of them where you can give it the best. So whether it's like in my case with the Legion, it's just down the street. You know, VFW's in Janesville, now the Fleet Reserve Association's all the way up in Portage. Well, obviously I can't hit them up. So, you know, if you live in Janesville, well, the VFW is right there, you know, so but yeah, and for the folks that are out there, like, well, what have they done for me? Well, they do a lot for you. If nothing else, it's to ride herd on the VA and the politicians and for your benefits.
That's where the GI Bill came from.
Right. And the other thing is look at it as not so much what can they do for me, what can you do for them?
Absolutely, that's what I was just going to throw.
You know,
in there.
I mean, we were all. We all have the common denominator of being in the military and looking out for each other and all that, and that's kind of what we're doing here. We're looking. I know when I come back from the Gulf War, we were received with ticker tape parades and everything, and the biggest reason for that was the Vietnam vets came home to, you know, getting spit on and paint thrown at them and worse and baby killer and all that crap. And they said that we're not going to let that happen to these guys,
which is good.
And they stood up and the most of them were in the veterans organizations and got the things going for the, you know, the big receptions and stuff that we had when we came home, and so that's, you know, like I say, I mean, you know, it ain't cheap. You know, they all have dues to pay and all that. So, but if you can afford it, join them, and if you got the time, I know the younger folks that got families and everything. It's all about time management with kids. I mean, I've been there, done that. I know what it is. But you know, if at the time you can't do anything but, you know, pay your dues and maybe come out and help with a food stand or 10 bar one night or whatever. I mean, nobody says you got to be down here every day or every meeting or every event, but anything you can do, and it's come a long way from the smoke-filled bar room, old timers just sitting around telling war stories.
Yeah.
Little anecdote. The first time I come home on leave, that was in '82 when my grandpa died, and I came down to the Legion because it was really the only place that I had anything in common. I don't even remember now. I guess it was the Elbow Room. It's what's Newt's now. I'd go down there, and I'd run into friends from classmates from school, but, I'd already been around the world.
Yeah.
And seen things and all that. And I mean, some of these guys, they hadn't even left Orfordville yet, and so we really didn't have much in common. So I'd come down here eventually, and there was, some of the old timers that I knew from growing up, and every one of them, you're going to stay in. I mean, I've been in 2 years, you're going to stay in. And at the time, I wasn't sure. I was thinking about it, maybe re-enlist once. And boy, if I had it to do again, I would have stayed in, I would have been retired now for X number of years. And so that was the thing, it was a good outfit. I was seeing the world. I was having fun. I loved it over in Westpac. It was like, there's nothing at home.
Right.
The 80s, the economy wasn't too hot. And I was getting paid to learn a trade and see the world. So, and it's still that way today. I mean, the money's a lot better, and you're still able to see the world and learn some sort of trade no matter what branch or whatever you go in. I mean, it's something where, your infantry guys, there's not a whole lot for you on the outside. I mean, if that's what you want to do, but if you can get into some sort of technical field, that really helps. So,
and just being able to, if I can put this right, smell, taste, walk in a different culture.
Oh, sure.
Nobody
sure.
can ever take that knowledge and power away from you. That, like you said, there's some of your classmates never left Overfill. I can relate to that they don't have that experience.
No.
And to be able to sit down with other veterans who have similar experiences or maybe can relate to a different culture that they've been to. Like, I've never been to Japan, but I can tell you about Turkey, Spain, and Italy till we're blue in the face. And just learning those cultures and learning how they're brought up and then bringing it back and looking at the United States, as we had talked about earlier, and going, we're doing pretty damn good.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I lived in Japan for 16 years, and other than my last year, we always lived out in town. It was just, I figure I'm living in a foreign country. Granted, I had the advantage of my wife being Japanese, but I mean, I wasn't always married. I mean, my first 4 or 5 years, me and a buddy would get a house, and you learned how to pay your bills, and the neighbors were all great, and it was awesome. It was a lot of fun. I mean, the second house I was at, we were right on the beach, and there was a bus stop right outside the front door. So we'd sit out, in the summertime, we'd sit out there, and they had a traffic light for the crosswalk.
Okay.
So we'd sit out on the front steps in the summertime drinking beer, and we'd push the button all the time to cause traffic to stop. So, all the little hotties with their boyfriends in the cars, they see these Americans and they're all giggling and waving, and we're, hooting and hollering and all this, and the boyfriend's doing a slow burn, and, or the buses stop and everybody gets out to go down to the beach, and it was great. And then we'd go hang out on the beach, and in fact, we had a few parties up at the house. As it started getting late, we'd invite them up to the house, and it was, it's a whole cultural thing.
It is.
Even though you can't talk to each other, you can still kind of get across what you want to do and have fun. And, I got lifelong friends over there from that, so Get out and experience. That's what I would tell my guys. They'd come on board and it's, oh, this place sucks. Okay, why does it suck?
Right.
Well, with the exception of probably deer hunting, anything you like to do back here in the States, you could pretty much do over there. It might cost you a little more money, but they had tours, they had trips, they had, any type of recreational activity you could think of. But you had to get out of the bars.
Right.
And it took me 4 years to learn that.
Yeah, I know about that.
I realized that I could go out on a tour during the day and then go get snot slinging drunk in the bar at night. I didn't have to start at noon, and because the first 4 years it was all bars and tattoo parlors, and but you experience all that culture and get out and meet the people and see how the rest of the world lives, and yeah, like you say, you realize that we got it pretty good back here.
Yeah.
We got all our warts and all with things going on here, but things are pretty good.
Almost everybody owns a car here.
Right.
And then that's not like that in every country. So,
but
anything else you want to talk about?
I don't know. I think I've rambled on enough. I don't know.
Well, it's been great talking to you.
Yeah.
For all vets out there, remember, keep your head up and keep moving forward. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure.